Hi, everybody. It's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun and host of Vancouver Island Time. And this week we have...
Hi, I'm Nikki Macdonald. I'm the federal Liberal candidate running in Victoria.
So, Nikki, I was looking at your website and looking at your history. So you have a very diverse history, I think. You've just finished your PhD, correct?
That's right. I convocated in June.
And what was the topic?
So my PhD was in the area of faculty was public admin. I was at the School of Public Admin with a focus on public policy, and my research analysis was on Canada's Oceans Act.
So that's really awesome, actually, because I like the fact that you're running in this area, and the oceans are such obviously a big part of our ecosystems here. Is that the reason why you focused on that area, because it's a West Coast issue?
The real inspiration came from working over the past decade in the area of ocean research through Ocean Networks Canada, which is one of Canada's leading ocean research facilities. And going through that process of working in ocean research and realizing there's such a gap, there's such a need for people who are focused on how do you take that research and use it to improve the way that we take care of our oceans, the way we manage our oceans, the way we make decisions around our oceans. And that is what led me into the PhD.
Okay, and then prior to that, you have a background in public admin, sort of public policy.
No, so prior to that, I actually started out my life working in the NGO sector, which was terrific in Toronto, and a sector which I've really remained very connected with through the United Way. I spent a number of years working in politics as a senior advisor to Jean Chrétien, and then I made a shift into industry. So I worked with a global pharmaceutical company, and that was a very different environment in which to work, but an exhilarating one, where your colleagues, our region was Canada, Europe. So a lot of my colleagues I worked with were in Europe and doing similar types of work that I was doing here in Canada. So that was very exciting.
So you kind of have a trifecta of a background. So you have the public, you have the private, and then you have the research.
Exactly. And I found that when I was working at UVic over the past decade, that trifecta made a huge difference, because it is about being able to work across sectors. It's being able to act as a translator between sectors. We all have our own language, our own culture, way of speaking. And so moving across those sectors, and then most importantly, bringing partnerships together, because whether it's in research or whether it's in politics, you have to work together to solve problems. It can't be solved by the government or by the research university. You need to bring them all together at the table.
Right. So you need theory and application.
Well, you need more than just theory and application. You need different perspectives on the problem. So a government is going to approach a problem differently than a university researcher might, which will be different from how industry might approach that problem. And where I found my greatest strength is being able to bring all those perspectives together.
So tell me about why you decided to run.
That's a very good question. I was asked to run in November of last year, and I had literally just defended my dissertation, and my dad passed away, and I said, that's too big. I can't take on another big thing. I had done my PhD while I was working. It took 7 years. So I was a mom, I was working full time, and I was doing a PhD full time. And I needed a rest. I needed a break. But in February, I took on a new volunteer role. I was the BC co-chair for the Federal Liberal campaign and worked with candidates across the province, recruiting people to run for us on the island, in the interior, on the mainland, and helping them build campaign teams. Going through that process really helped me think about, okay, wait a second, what are the issues? What's important to me? And this is my time to go and put my name on a ballot. Reasons that I hadn't put my name on before were my girls were too little, or I was in the middle of the PhD. Those reasons have now gone. My girls are 24 and 25. The PhD is done. It seemed like the right time.
And that's often a barrier for women entering politics, right? Having kids.
Absolutely. I think even increasingly today, it's a barrier for everybody because we do now, and we certainly saw that under the Trudeau government with both men and women who have children, small young children, who have to balance, how do I serve in Ottawa and yet be there to take care of my kids? I grew up, my dad was a member of Parliament, and so I grew up in that world. And it was a very different world. My mother and my sisters and I all moved to Ottawa. We were there in the evenings when he came home from the house. He would go back to his constituency on the weekends sometimes, but the expectations were very much that there would be a spouse, a partner at home, taking care of the family. Today, most modern families, it's two parents are working, and you're juggling. And you can't have a spouse necessarily just move to Ottawa and set up shop, set up home there. And so it is really much more of a balancing act. For me, I'm found it easier to think about that once my girls were grown. Yeah, absolutely.
So tell me about small business, and because that's of interest to me. I work with a lot of people who run their own businesses, specifically women, but men and women. Tell me what the Trudeau government is doing for small business.
Very interesting. There's a couple things that I've been learning about small business here in Victoria and in Canada. Do you know that the majority of small businesses are started by quote unquote seniors, people over the age of 50?
I believe it, because you know what? At that time, you want to do what you want to do.
Well, I think that's part of it. I think that people are saying I can do a third phase in my career. And that's somewhat for me. I came out of finishing my PhD. I had a great work career background. And I said, well, what do I want to do next? And so what I did is I started my own small business, forming a consulting company and going out and taking on major projects with both the government as well as in the NGO sector. I find there's a lot of people like me, and there's a lot of women like me who say at 50 plus, this is what I want to do. I want to have a little more autonomy, a little bit more ability to decide on what projects I'm going to work on, and have a bit more opportunity to direct how my career is looking. So I think it's exciting to be a small business owner, but there are challenges. I've certainly gone through the experience of how you set up a small business from a legal point of view, financial point of view. And I'm really happy that under this Liberal government, they've reduced the small business tax from 11 to 9 to make it less of a burden on small business entrepreneurs like you and I. The other is I'm really happy that they're creating more instruments that help small businesses get access to capital, to startup capital, as well as getting access to the kind of resources and support that we need to launch, whether it's accounting advisory services or it's legal services, because those, of course, are very costly parts of starting up a new business.
I think also people need mentorship and learning how to delegate, like just run the business as a leader.
Absolutely. It's not something unique to small business, but it's certainly, we see it a lot. In my work with researchers at the university, that was something we often were working with them on, as where the lead researcher, brilliant, but now all of a sudden that research project had morphed into 10, 15, or 100 people, and helping them develop the management skills and the governance skills to be able to manage this larger entity. We see the same in small business. And Techtoria is one example of an association that is helping small business grow and small business leaders grow through that change. And what I find exciting is small business, small and medium-sized business is really becoming the fourth pillar of the Victoria economy. I mean, we are a government town. The government of British Columbia, the municipal governments, of which we have 13, remain a big chunk of the economy and a significant employer. The post-secondary sector, we have Royal Roads, UVic, Camosun. These, again, are significant employers and generators of GDP here in Victoria. We have the tourism sector from the we see the cruise ships come in. Some people love them, some people hate them, but they indeed bring revenue into the city. And we also see people, I was at the James Bay Market, and most of the people I ran into were Americans who were here visiting, who'd flown, they take a week off and they come to Victoria because it's a great place for them to visit. The fourth sector is the tech sector. And when I talked to the Techtoria about that, they said the reason is because Victoria is a magnet city, and it's a great place to work. It's a great place to live. Most of these people sell their business, if you will, around the world. They sell internationally. They sell across Canada. They don't have to be in Toronto or Montreal or somewhere else, and often are heavily recruited by San Francisco to move down there and say, no, this is a more livable city. We want to live here. And what the federal government can do and should be doing more, and that's why I'm keen to be the member of parliament here, is find out what are the resources and the partnerships and the opportunity that we can bring to Victoria that can help that sector grow, that can help small and medium-sized enterprises market their wares, market their services and goods and expertise around the world and across the country.
Well, I think one of the issues that's prohibiting people from moving here is just a lack of housing. Like, when you think about it, we're on an island, so that's number one. So we have a limited resource, but the other is just simply, I think, there's a lack of planning and a lack of the sort of amalgamation that's needed between the different municipalities with, what's the overall strategy going to be? Because people do try and hire people. I know this is true because I have a good friend in payroll, and what she said is they hire people, then those people can't find a place to live. And it's not a question of affordability. It's really a lack of
availability. Available housing.
Yeah. So is there any plan on the horizon regarding federal incentives in housing?
Absolutely. So they've already begun. The federal Liberal government was the first government in well over 4 decades to put in a national housing strategy. And it's got 4 parts to it. The first is the building of more rental units, creating more homes, more housing, so that we have that available stock. The second is repairing and refreshing the existing stock. A lot of it was built in the 70s and the 80s and is in much need of the TLC, the repair, to make it livable. The third is what I call the booster benefit for those people who are renting today but are close to, but not quite able to buy their first home. The Liberal government put in place the first-time Homebuyers Benefit, which gives them a boost to get into their first home. That's up to 10% for a new home, 5% for an existing home, and helps young people, all people, move out of the rental market and into their own home. That also is, we'll see along that benefit coming in after the election in 2020, the benefit to help renters. So those renters who are on the cusp, they can't quite afford. So again, this is obviously targeting low income, low to middle income, but they're in a situation where they'd like to move out of their parents' house, or they'd like to move into a 2-bedroom house because they're a family, providing them with that benefit that allows them to access that better rental environment. The fourth is homelessness. And I think this has come up in terms of, can you call yourself a livable city and have a significant homeless population? And what the Liberal government is doing is addressing homelessness as a health issue as well as a housing issue. So the first step is absolutely creating a transitional housing that gets people off the street, puts them in a safe and secure environment, and allows them to access the services, addiction treatment, mental health care that helps them address the issues that put them on the street in the first place.
Yeah. So regarding the first-time buyer incentive program, the only issue I have with it is that with the income barrier that there is, it limits the purchase value that they can get in. And I don't know if in Victoria they can actually, if it'll actually work in Victoria itself, only because if you want to get into a house, a crappy house is $599,000. And I remember when I got into real estate in 2006, it was $299, went up to $399, $499. So we're going up. So just the barrier, the threshold to get in, even with a condo with the strata fees coming up, and those are incorporated when you're looking at your debt service ratio. It's just so hard here. So what I tell people is, maybe you don't have to buy in Victoria. You can rent in Victoria, but maybe buy elsewhere in the country, somewhere where maybe you want to retire, right? Like, don't think, oh, I have to buy and live there. Maybe with the program you do, but just as a strategy, I find it's a limiting belief that people think that they have to live where they purchase.
Right. Fair point. Yeah. Recently, I participated in an announcement the Prime Minister made recognizing that there are cities like Victoria, Vancouver, and Toronto where the cost of the housing is so high that the $500,000 ceiling was a limiting point. So they have committed to raise that to up to $700,000. So I think that will help to address the challenges of getting into a high cost market like Victoria. The other thing they're going after, though, is keeping in mind that for Vancouver and Victoria, to some degree, what we've been experiencing is the impact of speculation in our real estate market. And so what Trudeau is doing is committing that taking the speculation tax that was applied in British Columbia and extending it across the country. So we don't have foreign speculators who previously invested in the Vancouver market, now moving and inflating the prices in other parts of the country. At the same time, he remedied some of the issues that came up in the initial launch of the BC tax. So this does not apply to Canadians who are living abroad. This does not apply to permanent residents. So for those people who are fearful that a speculation tax would mean that they would be disserviced because they happen to work in the US or they happen to work in Europe, that won't apply to them. This is truly going after the foreign dollars that come in and purely park their money in the Canadian real estate market for the sole purpose of profiting off of it. And they're not contributing to the community. They're in fact not living here.
Do you know what the percentage is?
Of what? Sorry.
Of foreign investment?
I don't know what I think there's actually a BC inquiry that was launched just recently that's taking a look at that question to try and understand what is the scope of that foreign speculation dollars. But trying to capture that data is a key part of it. And so the third pillar that Trudeau announced recently is helping those authorities like the Canada Revenue Agency, the RCMP, and others get a better data, better information on all of that, including creating barriers so that you no longer can have a numbered company, that somebody isn't disclosing who they are when they're buying that house, which is in fact what we saw quite a bit in Vancouver.
Yeah, it's not that high. I think it's less than 2% in Victoria. But one of the issues I find with the speculation taxes, specifically with some clients, I've had some people who want to move here who, for instance, there was a Turkish family and the husband was still working in Turkey. So that's where the income was. The wife and daughter were going to Camosun College and they're trying to turn their life around. And then with the speculation tax, because they weren't Canadian citizens or permanent residents yet, all of a sudden it took them out of the market. And, they were trying to establish a home here and all of a sudden they were priced out. So there's, I think, unwanted side effects of things like that. I've also seen some Americans now wanting to move up here and because they're not yet Canadian citizens or permanent residents, they're getting stuck with it as well. So unfortunately for one of my clients who was buying at the higher end, it was a $200,000 tax. But to them, they just looked at it as the exchange rate. So I think there's sort of unwanted side effects of people who genuinely want to live here and then that they can't do so because of that.
Well, I think it's hard to say what the national tax will look like or what the impact will be because it hasn't been implemented. And as I mentioned, I think there was some learning that came out of the BC tax. If there are people who are coming to live here, they're coming to live on some kind of permanent basis so that they would not be affected by the national speculation tax. If they're coming here for the sole purpose of buying a condo, hoping to just park their money here and watch the price, the value of that condo go up and then sell out, that is what is being targeted here by the national speculation tax.
If they implement a speculation tax, where are they going to put that money back?
Well, the money's, I don't know actually the answer to that question, Jane. Presumably some of the monies will be used to assist the authorities going after where the money laundering that we know has been getting into the real estate market and ensuring there's better disclosure of the provenance of that money so we don't become a haven for money laundering. And again, Victoria has not necessarily been that location. We've seen it a lot more in Vancouver.
Yeah, and maybe the money could go towards something like low-income housing or entry-level housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing we need, I think, in Victoria really is a rental market. We don't have that here. It is happening on the West Shore, but we don't have sort of purpose-built rental housing really in downtown Victoria, which would be a good thing.
Right. Well, actually, I don't know if that's, I'm quite impressed since I've been here well over a decade. And in the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of rental units go up in the downtown Victoria. So that is a combination. Kudos to the province because I think they've made it easier for developers to put up. In fact, they've created incentives for developers to put up rental housing. The federal government is supporting with them on that through partnership. And then the next step is to encourage developers as they're putting up rental housing to include a social housing component to that.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah. Okay. So my last question, tell me about your perspective on Andrew Scheer and his thoughts on politics.
Well, it's one of the reasons I decided this is the time I need to put my name on a ballot. Having worked as an ocean researcher under the Harper government, I was at the University of Victoria. When we went to Ottawa to talk about our research, we were not allowed to use the word climate change. I don't want to see us go backwards to that. We need to address the climate change and the risks that are associated with that. The IPCC report is very clear that we're in a state of urgency. So we need to do that. The second is, and I find when I'm talking to people at the doors, this is a really shared concern that under an Andrew Scheer government, we're going to go backwards on equality rights. We're going to go backwards in not having a voice of respect and tolerance. And that, I think that we need a strong voice, and that's one of the reasons I put my name on the ballot, is to be a strong voice that says no to the divisive politics of Andrew Scheer and Jason Kenney and Doug Ford and that guy down south that we don't like to mention, and no to the populist threads that are starting to poke up in our political system. We need to remind people, and that's certainly the world I grew up in, watching my dad in politics, watching Monsieur Chrétien in politics, and being part of his team, where you can have a respectful, tolerant voice that works building collaboration and compromise to get it done.
Right. Open and accepting.
Exactly.
Okay. So how do people get in touch with you?
Hi, I have a website set up for the campaign. It's Nikki, Nikki Macdonald, MacDonald.ca. Please follow me there. We'll be putting up blogs, posts about some of the issues that we're thinking about. We're also on Facebook. We're actively posting events, updates, photos from the campaign at Nikki 4 Victoria. And then Instagram, follow me at Oceans, Nikki, Nikki, as well as Twitter at Ocean Nikki.
Okay, so if you want more information about Nikki Macdonald, you can follow her online. If you want more information about real estate in Victoria, you can follow me. I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun, and we hope to see you again at Vancouver Island time. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Jane.
Okay, bye-bye.